3.5. Tonight, we dive into one of the most tantalizing legends in history, the story of a library so vast, so rich with forbidden knowledge, that the Vatican didn't just guard it, they destroyed it. The Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of ancient wisdom, was said to hold secrets that could change everything we know about humanity's past. But what if I told you those secrets didn't just disappear in a fire? What if they were taken, hidden, and erased by the very hands meant to protect them? For centuries, the Vatican has controlled the flow of knowledge, keeping ancient manuscripts locked away in vaults, their true contents known only to the select few. But hidden in the dark corners of the world, a different story is being told, a story of stolen texts, lost languages, and a power struggle over the very truths that could unravel everything. The lost books of Alexandria are said to hold the keys to forgotten knowledge, knowledge that could challenge religions, rewrite history, and reveal secrets about our existence that were never meant to be uncovered. But those who sought to uncover them faced endless obstacles. Faceless agents, sealed archives, and an institution so powerful it could erase entire histories without a trace. So, as we pull back the curtain on this legend, remember one thing: those who discovered these truths, they were never heard from again. Before we embark on this dangerous journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, because the answers we uncover tonight might just change everything. The sun hung low over the vast plains of ancient Mesopotamia, a land bathed in the glow of early civilization. But beneath that serene beauty, something grand and ambitious was being built. The Tower of Babel, the towering symbol of human will, was rising against the sky, reaching higher with each stone laid. At the time, no one could have known just how far the dream would stretch, nor how it would one day change the course of human history. What drove the people of Babel to undertake such an enormous task? It was not merely the desire to build a great city or a magnificent temple, but a yearning for something far greater, a dream of unity, power, and transcendence, fueled by the ambition to reach the heavens themselves. The builders of Babel were not just constructing a tower, they were building a bridge between humanity and the divine. They believed that by uniting through a single language, they could overcome the boundaries of their human existence. To them, language was more than just a means of communication. It was the key to unlocking divine knowledge and power. If all people spoke the same tongue, they could collaborate without misunderstanding, unlocking a new era where nothing would be impossible. They believed they could touch the sky and perhaps even enter the realm of the gods. The ambition behind the Tower of Babel wasn't just about physical construction, it was about shaping the world according to human will. With each stone they placed, they imagined a future where humanity could finally escape its limitations. But the dream, as grand as it was, carried with it an inherent risk, the belief that human power could rival that of the gods. In their effort to unify, they ignored the warning signs of hubris. To them, reaching the heavens wasn't a symbol of faith. It was a declaration of human superiority. As the tower grew taller, so did the aspirations of its builders. The air around the construction site buzzed with excitement. The people of Babel were not simply workers, they were pioneers of a new age, one where the earth and the heavens could no longer be separated. But amidst the fervour of progress, a deep undercurrent of uncertainty began to form. Could such a dream, born from human pride, really lead to prosperity? Or would it bring about something far darker? Then, in the blink of an eye, the vision of Babel began to unravel. The ambitious unity that had driven so many to work together now faced its first test. Language, the very thing they thought would unite them, began to tear them apart. Confusion spread like wildfire across the workers. Words once understood became meaningless, and the very foundation of the tower began to shake, not just in the physical sense, but in the hearts and minds of those who had come together. In a moment of divine intervention, the great dream of Babel came crashing down, and the people were scattered. The dream of reaching the heavens, of transcending the limits of their mortal existence, was over. And yet, the ambition that had fueled the Tower of Babel remained, a silent force that would echo through the ages. Though the tower itself was abandoned, the seeds of that ambition would continue to grow, manifesting in the great cities and civilizations that followed. For humanity had learned a powerful lesson from Babel. Ambition, when unchecked, could lead to both greatness and destruction. And so, the story of Babel did not end with the fall of a tower, but with the birth of something far more enduring, an unquenchable thirst for power and unity, one that would continue to shape the future of mankind in ways the builders of Babel could never have imagined. The people of Babel had spent years laboring beneath the scorching sun, each brick and stone carrying with it their dreams of unity and divine power. The tower, a magnificent structure stretching toward the heavens, was almost complete. There was a sense of triumph in the air, as though the workers could already feel the victory of reaching the sky. Their voices rang out in one harmonious language, a single sound of purpose and ambition. For a time, it seemed as if nothing could stop them, and their dream of transcending the limitations of humanity felt within reach. Yet, as the tower grew taller, so too did the pride of those who built it. They believed that through their efforts they could ascend above the gods themselves. But little did they. No, their ambition had attracted the attention of something far greater than they could ever comprehend. In the quiet moments before the storm, a divine presence observed from above. It wasn't wrath that fueled the coming response, but a deep understanding of what was at stake. The ambition of Babel had reached a point where the balance of creation itself was threatened. Unity, though once a noble pursuit, had now become a tool of arrogance. The builders sought to challenge the natural order, believing that through their unity they could become like gods. But in their striving for greatness, they had forgotten that the power to create and divide lay not in human hands, but in the hands of the divine. And so, the time came for the earth to be reminded of its place beneath the heavens. Without warning, the divine intervention descended like a silent whirlwind, sweeping through the workers and scattering them in all directions. As they looked at one another, the language that once united them now became a barrier. Words meant nothing, and the voices they had once understood now sounded like a foreign tongue. Confusion spread like wildfire across the building site. The tower, which had once stood as a symbol of their collective power, now became a testament to their frailty. The dream of unity had been shattered, and in its place was division that would echo through the ages. God had not only divided the people by scattering them across the earth, but also by altering their very ability to communicate. The once shared language was now a confusing cacophony, each person unable to understand the other. It was as if the very foundation of their unity had been ripped apart, leaving them isolated in a world of misunderstanding. The builders, once united in their singular purpose, were now divided by the very thing that had once bound them together, language. The tower, once a soaring monument to human ambition, now stood as a hollow shell. The people, unable to communicate or understand one another, slowly abandoned their great work. The dream of reaching the heavens had come crashing down, not by force or fire, but by a quiet yet powerful divine hand. In a single act, the Tower of Babel had become a symbol of divine power and human arrogance, a reminder that no matter how high humanity might build, it would never surpass the boundaries set by the Creator. And so, the people were scattered across the earth, their languages forever divided. The unity they had once sought was replaced by a world full of diverse tongues, each one a reflection of the divine response to their pride. The tower, abandoned and incomplete, stood as a mute witness to the limits of human ambition. But, in that silence, a greater truth had been revealed. The heavens were not for the taking, and no matter how far mankind reached, it would always remain grounded in the divine will. In the aftermath of the Great Scattering, the world was never the same. The once unified people of Babel were now scattered across vast lands, each group speaking its own language, unable to understand the others. The tower that had stood as a symbol of human ambition now lay in ruins, a silent reminder of mankind's broken unity. In the centuries that followed, great civilizations rose and fell, each with its own culture, beliefs, and language. From the mighty Egyptians along the Nile to the early civilizations of China and the first peoples of the Americas, language became the defining thread of each society. Yet, amidst the diversity that bloomed across the earth, there lingered a question in the hearts of a few. Was there a language that existed before Babel's confusion? Was there a divine language, untouched by human pride, that could unlock the secrets of the universe itself? A small group of scholars, known for their wisdom and curiosity, began to ask these very questions. In the quiet halls of early temples, scribes gathered ancient texts, searching for any hint of the language that had been spoken by Adam, Noah, and the patriarchs, those who had walked with God before the confusion of Babel. These scholars believed that the key to divine knowledge lay not in the language of their time, but in the words spoken by the Creator himself. If they could uncover this sacred tongue, they believed, they could access the true wisdom that had been hidden since the fall of Babel. The scholars began their search by studying ancient manuscripts, many of which had been passed down from generation to generation. Some texts were believed to be older than the Tower of Babel itself, and others were shrouded in mystery. The scholars pored over these writings, deciphering symbols and searching for patterns. They believed that within these ancient texts there lay a map to the divine language, one that would connect them with the spiritual realm. As they worked tirelessly, they discovered that this language was not like any they had encountered before. It was not just a system of words, but a means of connecting with the very essence of creation. But the search for the divine language was not without its challenges. Many of the early texts were incomplete, and others had been deliberately obscured or hidden away. The scholars began to suspect that there were powerful forces at work, protecting the language from being rediscovered. Some believed that the ancient texts had been hidden by the priests of Babel, while others thought that the knowledge had been deliberately erased by those who sought to control the flow of divine wisdom. Despite these obstacles, the scholars persevered, convinced that the original language was not lost forever. As the years passed, the search for the sacred tongue spread to various corners of the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even the farthest reaches of the East, mystics and philosophers came together to explore the idea of a divine language. They believed that if they could master this language, they would not only unlock the secrets of the universe, but also attain enlightenment and wisdom beyond imagination. In time, the search for the divine language became a sacred quest. It was no longer just a pursuit of knowledge, but a spiritual journey to reconnect with the divine order. Those who believed in its power were willing to sacrifice everything to find it, hoping that in the ancient words of God, they would find the answers to the mysteries of life, creation, and existence itself. As the search continued, it became clear that the language was not just a tool for understanding the divine, but a key to unlocking the deeper truths of the universe, a truth that would remain elusive to all but the most devoted seekers. The early Christian era marked a time of profound change across Europe. As the Roman Empire crumbled, the Vatican began to rise as the central authority, not only spiritually, but intellectually. It wasn't just a shift of power, it was the birth of an institution that would hold sway over the hearts and minds of millions for centuries to come. The Christian Church, now firmly established as the guiding force in Europe, knew that in order to maintain its power, it had to control more than just people's faith. It had to control knowledge itself. And so, in the heart of Rome, the Vatican established its library, a place where ancient texts and sacred manuscripts could be gathered, preserved, and, most importantly, controlled. In the beginning, the Vatican Library was a humble collection of religious texts. But as the Church's influence grew, so did the library. It soon became the most important archive of sacred knowledge in the Western world. The Church understood that knowledge was power, and by collecting manuscripts and preserving ancient writings, they could shape the narrative of history, philosophy, and science. But the library's mission wasn't just to collect. It was to decide what knowledge was worthy of preservation and what would be cast aside. As the centuries passed, the Vatican's library became more than just a repository of religious texts. It became the central hub for scholars, theologians, and philosophers. It was a place where the Church could guard the intellectual treasures of the past, while determining which ideas would be allowed to flourish in the present. The library's collections expanded to include not only Christian scriptures, but also works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, early scientific texts, and historical records. But with every manuscript that was added, there was an unspoken agreement. The Vatican controlled what knowledge would be shared and what would remain hidden. The library became a symbol of both the preservation and the suppression of knowledge. In the hands of the Vatican, texts were carefully examined, and the Church determined which ones would align with its doctrine. Some works were rewritten, others destroyed, and some were locked away in the deepest vaults, hidden from the world. The Vatican's library was not just a space for the accumulation of knowledge. It was a tool for the preservation of religious power. By controlling the flow of information, the Vatican could ensure that its teachings remained unquestioned, and that its authority over both the spiritual and intellectual realms went unchallenged. While the library's shelves were filled with knowledge, it was not a free exchange of ideas. Access to the manuscripts was limited, and only a select few were allowed to study them. The scholars who worked in the Vatican Library were bound by the Church's strict guidelines. They could study the works that the Church deemed acceptable, but anything that went against Church teachings was either censored or hidden. The Vatican had found a way to maintain its dominance, not just through religious authority, but through intellectual control. The founding of the Vatican Library marked the beginning of an era in which knowledge became an instrument of power. It wasn't just about preserving the past, it was about shaping the future. By controlling the knowledge that was passed down to future generations, the Church could ensure that its influence would endure. The Vatican Library, with its vast collections and its carefully curated contents, became the heart of intellectual life in Europe, where knowledge and religion were forever intertwined. And in the shadows of its towering shelves, the Church's control over what was known and what was not continued to shape the course of history. Beneath the Vatican, hidden from the public eye, lies a secret world, its archives. These archives are not just a collection of religious texts and manuscripts. They hold something far older, far more mysterious. Among the dusty shelves and locked vaults, ancient languages are kept, languages that few have ever seen, let alone understood. These texts are said to contain the remnants of a forgotten past, a past where the boundaries between man and the divine were less clear. Some believe that within these ancient manuscripts lies the key to the lost language of Babel, the original language spoken before the Tower of Babel was abandoned and humanity was scattered across the earth. The idea of a sacred divine language has fascinated scholars, mystics, and philosophers for centuries. It is said that the first language, the language of Adam and the patriarchs, was a language capable of unlocking the deepest truths of the universe. This language was not just a means of communication, it was the very code of creation itself. If humanity could rediscover this language, they could bridge the gap between the earthly and the divine, gaining access to wisdom lost to the ages. The Vatican, with its centuries-old tradition of preserving knowledge, has kept these ancient texts locked away, believing that the power contained within them is too great to be unleashed without careful consideration. Over the years, whispers have spread about what lies hidden within the Vatican's secret archives. Some say that the manuscripts contain writings in languages that have never been spoken by modern man, languages that might predate even the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece. There are rumors that these texts are written in a form of proto-language, one that exists outside of the known linguistic families, a language so ancient that it may be the closest thing to the language of the gods. The Vatican, however, has kept these texts out of reach for most scholars, allowing only a select few to even catch a glimpse of the ancient writings. Those who have been allowed to study these manuscripts speak of the strange, powerful symbols that appear within them. Some say that these symbols are not just words, but keys to unlocking spiritual truths. Others claim that the texts are written in such a way that they contain hidden messages, layered meanings that can only be uncovered by those who truly understand the deeper connections between language, the divine, and the cosmos. Why then does the Vatican keep these texts locked away? Is it because the knowledge contained within them is too dangerous to be revealed? Could there be a fear that, if these ancient languages were to be understood, the very foundations of the Church's authority could be shaken? The answer, it seems, lies in the belief that the power of these languages is not just intellectual, but spiritual. To unlock the divine language would be to access a higher plane of understanding, one that transcends the mortal world. And that it seems, is something the Vatican is not willing to risk. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as the guardian of knowledge, controlling what is taught and what is hidden. The ancient texts within its secret archives, containing the languages of the past, are a reminder of how knowledge can be both a tool of power and a key to enlightenment. But the question remains: if these texts hold the key to understanding the divine language of Babel, what would happen if that knowledge were ever revealed? Would it unlock the mysteries of the universe, or would it open a door that is better left closed? Father Antonius had always been drawn to the mysteries of language. As a brilliant linguist, he had spent years studying the oldest manuscripts, deciphering lost languages, and unlocking the secrets of ancient civilizations. But it wasn't until he was given access to the Vatican's secret archives that he found his true calling. Deep within the dusty shelves of the archives, he discovered texts that seemed to speak of a language unlike any other, a language that predated even the earliest known forms of writing. This was no ordinary collection of ancient manuscripts. These texts whispered of a divine language, a tongue spoken by the Creator himself, one that could unlock the deepest mysteries of existence. For Father Antonius, it was as if the door to a new realm of knowledge had been opened, and he was determined to understand it. As he pored over the texts, Father Antonius began to decode the strange symbols and characters. The language, he soon realized, was not just a method of communication. It was a means of connecting with the divine. The more he studied, the more he felt as though he were tapping into a power beyond human comprehension. The ancient language seemed to have a rhythm and structure that went beyond words, as if it held the very key to understanding the universe itself. Father Antonius became obsessed. He believed that through his work he was rediscovering the language of God, a language that had been lost to mankind ever since the fall of Babel. But as his studies continued, Father Antonius began to attract attention. His discoveries did not go unnoticed by the higher-ups within the Vatican. At first, his work was seen as a curiosity, a scholarly pursuit of little consequence. But as the details of his findings began to leak, they reached the ears of the Vatican's Inquisition. What had started as an academic endeavor was now being viewed as something much more dangerous, heretical. To the Church, the idea that someone might be attempting to rediscover the language of God was not only audacious, but threatening. The Inquisition, always on the lookout for any deviation from orthodoxy, soon began to view Father Antonius and his work as a challenge to the Church's authority. The Inquisition had long been the enforcer of religious dogma, punishing heretics and suppressing ideas that could undermine the Church's teachings. They had always been quick to label anything that strayed too far from accepted doctrine as a threat to the faith. Father Antonius's research, in their eyes, was no different. The rediscovery of a divine language, one that had been lost to humanity, could be seen as an attempt to place knowledge and power outside the realm of the Church. To the Inquisition, this was a dangerous pursuit, one that could unravel the very foundations of the Church's control over the spiritual and intellectual life of Europe. Soon, Father Antonius found himself under scrutiny. His every move was watched, and the scholars who worked with him were questioned. The pressure mounted, and what had begun as an intellectual quest soon became a battle for survival. The Vatican, once the protector of knowledge, now stood as its greatest adversary. The search for the divine language was no longer just an academic pursuit, it had become an act of defiance. Father Antonius knew that his work had crossed a line, and he had no choice but to decide whether to continue his search, risking everything, or abandon his quest for the sake of his own safety. The heresy of language was now upon them. What had started as a search for truth had become a dangerous game, where knowledge itself was seen as a threat. For Father Antonius and his fellow scholars, the pursuit of understanding had led them into a perilous place, one where the power of the Church and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge were set on a collision course. As Father Antonius continued his studies deep within the Vatican's secret archives, his obsession with the lost language of Babel grew. Each manuscript he uncovered led to another, and slowly a pattern began to emerge. But it wasn't until one fateful day, hidden in the darkest corner of the library, that he stumbled upon a codex unlike any he had ever seen before. This ancient text, bound in leather and covered in strange markings, seemed to hum with an energy that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. The script was unlike anything known to modern scholars. It wasn't just a forgotten language, it was something entirely foreign, something that seemed to speak directly to the soul. Father Antonius carefully opened the codex, feeling the weight of its potential in his hands. As he read the first few pages, he realized that what he had uncovered was no ordinary book. The codex contained teachings far older than anything he had encountered in his previous research. The metaphysical concepts contained within its pages were profound, dealing with the nature of existence, the creation of the universe, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. It hinted at the original language of creation, the very language spoken by God before the fall of Babel. The deeper he read, the more he was struck by the realization that this was not just a historical artifact. It was a key to understanding the true nature of the world and the cosmos. The Codex spoke of a time before time, when language itself was the fabric of creation. In this ancient text, words weren't just symbols, they were the building blocks of reality. Each word, each symbol, carried with it an immense power that could shape the very fabric of existence. The teachings within the Codex suggested that humanity's true potential lay in the mastery of this original divine language. It was a language that could transcend the limitations of the human mind, allowing its speaker to access a higher plane of understanding, to commune with the divine, and to unlock the mysteries of life and death. For Father Antonius, this discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. He now held within his hands the key to knowledge that could radically alter the Church's understanding of creation and salvation. The Codex's teachings implied that the universe itself was not a static, unchanging entity, but a dynamic, ever-evolving creation that could be influenced and shaped by the power of language. If the Church were to embrace this knowledge, it would challenge everything they had taught about the nature of God, the creation of the world, and the path to salvation. Father Antonius realized the immense weight of what he had uncovered. This codex, if made public, could shake the very foundation of the Church. It suggested that the divine language spoken at Babel was not lost forever, as the Church had always believed, but could be rediscovered and used to unlock the secrets of the universe. It was a dangerous idea, one that could undermine the Church's control over spiritual knowledge and the very way people understood their relationship with God. As Father Antonius continued to study the Forbidden Codex, he found himself at a crossroads. The knowledge he had uncovered was too powerful to ignore, yet it was too dangerous to share. The Church, he knew, would never allow such a radical teaching to take hold. And so, he faced a choice. Continue his research in secret, risking his life and his faith, or destroy the Codex, ensuring that the knowledge it contained would never reach the light of day. The stakes had never been higher, and Father Antonius knew that whatever path he chose would change the course of history forever. Word of Father Antonius's discovery spread like wildfire through the Vatican, though not as quickly as he would have liked. What had begun as a private obsession soon became the talk of the Church's highest circles. The Forbidden Codex, with its teachings on the divine language, had caught the attention of those who held power within the Church. And with that attention came both opportunity and danger. A secret council was quietly convened, a gathering of the most trusted cardinals and theologians, each chosen to discuss the implications of Antonius's findings. The Church was divided. There were those who saw the potential to use the knowledge within the Codex to solidify the Church's power over the faithful, and there were others who feared that such knowledge, if made public, could undermine centuries of control and disrupt the very foundations of Christianity. At the heart of the Council's deliberations was the question of control. The teachings within the Codex, with their promise of a divine language capable of reshaping reality, were a direct challenge to the Church's authority. For centuries, the Vatican had been the gatekeeper of spiritual truth. It determined what knowledge was sacred, what was heretical, and what the faithful should be allowed to believe. But now, with the potential to unlock a forgotten divine power, that control was at risk. Some members of the Council saw the rediscovery of the original language as an opportunity, a chance to bring the faithful closer to the divine, to enhance the Church's spiritual authority, and to establish a new era of enlightenment. They believed that by mastering this language, the Church could perform miracles, heal the sick, and even command the forces of nature. For them, the knowledge contained within the Codex was a tool to strengthen the Vatican's grip on power, a tool that could help them solidify their position as the only true authority in the world. But others, especially those with more conservative views, saw the discovery as a threat. If the knowledge within the Codex were to be shared, if the divine language were to be spoken by anyone other than the clergy, it could create chaos. The Church's hold on the masses was built on faith, on the belief that the Vatican was the sole intermediary between man and God. To allow ordinary people access to such divine power would shake the very structure of society. They feared that the Codex could lead to heresy, rebellion, and the collapse of the Church's authority. There was no telling what would happen if this knowledge fell into the wrong hands. For Father Antonius, the pressure was mounting. He had spent years uncovering the secrets within the Codex, and now that knowledge was threatening to pull him into a dangerous game of politics and power. The Council's deliberations had made it clear. The Church was torn. Some wanted to use the knowledge to enhance its influence, while others wanted to suppress it at all costs. Antonius had thought he was simply uncovering the truth, but now he found himself in the middle of a battle that reached far beyond his understanding. As the pressure from the Vatican grew, Antonius faced a choice: continue his research and risk everything, or abandon his quest for knowledge in order to protect himself and the people he loved. The stakes had never been higher. The Church was no longer just a place of faith. It had become a battlefield where knowledge itself was a weapon, and Antonius had unwittingly become its most dangerous player. The day of reckoning came faster than Father Antonius could have imagined. The Vatican had made its decision, and it was final. The Codex, along with other ancient manuscripts that hinted at the divine language, was to be deemed heretical. Word came down from the highest authorities within the Church. All texts that threatened the established teachings of Christianity must be destroyed. Antonius, once filled with hope and determination, now felt the weight of despair pressing against him. What had begun as a quest for knowledge, a journey to unlock the secrets of creation, had turned into a battle for survival. The Vatican, in its fear of losing control, had decided that the truth contained within these texts could never be allowed to see the light of day. Father Antonius met in secret with his colleagues, the small group of scholars who had worked alongside him in uncovering the divine language. Their faces were grim, knowing the consequences of defying the Vatican's decree. The Church's power was vast, and to oppose it would mean certain death, either by execution or by a life of exile and obscurity. But, despite the threat hanging over them, Antonius and his fellow scholars weren't ready to give up. They knew that what they had uncovered was too important to be lost forever. The divine language, the key to understanding creation itself, could not simply vanish into the flames. And so, in the dead of night, Father Antonius and his colleagues set about transcribing the parts of the Codex that had yet to be destroyed. They worked quickly, knowing that the Vatican's enforcers could arrive at any moment. With careful hands, they copied the ancient symbols, the strange characters that held the power to unlock the deepest mysteries of the universe. It was a dangerous task, one that could get them all killed, but they were determined. Each stroke of the pen was a defiant act of preservation, a rebellion against the Church's attempt to bury the truth. As dawn approached, the fire was set. The Codex, along with the other manuscripts, was burned in a great pyre, its pages turning to ash as the flames consumed it. The Church had won, or so it seemed. The knowledge they feared was gone, erased from the world by the very people who had once claimed to be its protectors. But Antonius knew the truth. The Codex might be gone, but the language was not lost. It lived on in the secret transcription they had made, hidden in the margins of their notes, stored away in a place where only the bravest or the most desperate might find it. With the texts destroyed, the scholars scattered, each one going into hiding, carrying with them the secret of the divine language. Father Antonius knew that the road ahead would be dangerous. The Vatican would never stop searching for anyone who dared to defy its authority. But in his heart, he carried a flicker of hope. The knowledge was still there, buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear. And one day, he believed, it would be uncovered again. The language that could unlock the universe's mysteries had not been destroyed. It had only been hidden, waiting for the right time to be revealed. The deeper mystery, Father Antonius realized, was not in the language itself, but in how it had been buried by those who feared it most. And when the time came, it would be the key to unlocking everything. Years passed after the burning of the Codex, and the world moved on, seemingly unaffected by the destruction of such dangerous knowledge. The Vatican's power remained unchallenged, and the search for the divine language seemed to fade into history. But in the shadows, a whisper began to spread. It started as a rumour, a faint murmur in the halls of universities and monasteries, but it slowly began to grow. Some claimed that not all the manuscripts had been destroyed. They said that hidden away in forgotten corners of the world, there were still texts that contained fragments of the divine language, the same language that Father Antonius and his colleagues had spent their lives searching for. At first, the rumours seemed nothing more than fantasy, the product of desperate scholars who had been left in the dark. But then, the whispers began to grow louder. Former students of Antonius, who had once worked with him in secret, began to feel the stirrings of something larger than themselves. Among them was one of Antonius's former disciples, a young scholar named Thomas, who had been a close assistant during the transcriptions of the Codex. He had watched his mentor's every move, learning from him not only the intricacies of language, but the deeper purpose behind it. After Antonius's disappearance, Thomas had continued his studies in secret, always wondering if there was more to the divine language than anyone knew. Thomas had inherited his mentor's obsession, and like Antonius before him, he found it impossible to walk away from the pursuit of truth. As the rumours of hidden manuscripts spread, he became determined to uncover the lost fragments of the divine language. He gathered a small group of trusted scholars, each of them quietly driven by the same belief, that the language, hidden away for so long, could still be found. The search was perilous, and they knew the dangers all too well. If the Vatican discovered what they were doing, their lives would be in jeopardy. But the pull of the unknown was too strong to ignore, and the hope of finding the missing pieces of the divine language seemed to give them purpose. The group began to scour ancient libraries, private collections, and abandoned monasteries. They traced obscure references in long-forgotten texts, hoping to find even the smallest clue that might lead them to the hidden manuscripts. They travelled across Europe, and some even ventured into distant lands where the remnants of the ancient world still held secrets. Every piece of information they uncovered felt like a step closer to the truth, but each discovery only deepened the mystery. It was as if the fragments they sought had been scattered on purpose, hidden just out of reach to anyone who might uncover them. In the quiet moments of their search, Thomas would sometimes feel his mentor's presence in the back of his mind. He could almost hear Antonius's voice urging him to keep going, to never give up. It was as if the old man's obsession had been passed down through the generations, driving them all toward the same goal. The search for the divine language had become more than a quest for knowledge. It had become a mission, a calling. But with every step they took toward the truth, the group felt the weight of the Vatican's watchful eyes. They knew they could not keep their search hidden forever. The more they uncovered, the closer they came to a dangerous truth, or one that could change everything the Church had worked so hard to protect. And yet, despite the danger, they could not turn back. The whispers in the dark had already begun, and now there was no going back from the path they had chosen. The search for the divine language had taken Thomas and his group of scholars to many places, but it was in the ancient city of Babylon where they stumbled upon a discovery that would change everything. Babylon, once the greatest city of the ancient world, was believed to have been lost to time, its ruins buried beneath the sands of history. Most scholars had long assumed that the great city had been completely wiped out, its knowledge lost forever. But as they ventured into the heart of the ruins, something strange began to stir. The city's remnants were more than just a decaying shadow of the past. They held something alive, something hidden beneath the layers of time. As they explored the vast, crumbled walls of Babylon, the group uncovered artifacts that were unlike anything they had seen before. Old tablets, carved with strange symbols, lay scattered among the ruins. Some were broken, their edges worn away by centuries of neglect, but others were remarkably intact. These tablets did not seem to belong to any known language from the time of Babylon's fall. The symbols on the stones were a mix of familiar and unfamiliar characters, and to the trained eye they seemed to hint at something greater, something that connected the ancient world to the divine. Thomas's heart raced as he examined the artifacts. The symbols on the tablets seemed to align with the teachings from the codex he had studied years earlier. Could this be the key to the divine language? Could the destruction of the Tower of Babel, the event that had scattered humanity, have been less complete than believed? The idea that fragments of the divine language might have survived in Babylon was a revelation. If these artifacts were connected to the language spoken before the tower fell, they could hold the answers Thomas and his colleagues had been searching for all along. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the Tower of Babel's destruction had not been the end of the story. While the language may have been scattered and divided, remnants of it had survived in places few could imagine. The scholars found inscriptions that spoke of a time before the tower's collapse, when the people of Babylon had communicated in a way that transcended ordinary speech. These inscriptions hinted at a language of divine power, one that was capable of shaping reality itself. The idea that such knowledge had been preserved in Babylon, hidden in plain sight for centuries, was both thrilling and terrifying. But as the scholars delved deeper into the ruins, they also realized the danger they were facing. The artifacts they had uncovered were not just relics of the past. They were a threat to the established order. The Vatican, with its unyielding desire to control knowledge, would stop at nothing to ensure that these secrets never saw the light of day. As they pieced together the fragments of the divine language, they knew they were walking a fine line. What they had found in Babylon was not just a part of history. It was a living, breathing truth that could change the world forever. The question was no longer whether the language existed. It was whether they could survive long enough to unlock its full power. In the ruins of Babylon, the scholars had uncovered something far more than they had hoped for. The lost city had not only preserved the remnants of an ancient civilization, it had kept alive the secrets of the divine language, waiting for those brave enough to seek it out. The journey was far from over, but with each new discovery, the group moved closer to understanding the true nature of the language that had once bound humanity together. The Vatican had been silent for years, but the whispers could no longer be ignored. Word of the scholars' search for the lost divine language had reached the highest echelons of the Church. The Inquisition, once the enforcer of the Vatican's strict control over knowledge, was no longer enough to suppress the growing movement. The Vatican knew that the scholars' discoveries, if allowed to continue, could unravel the Church's very foundation. The knowledge they sought was not merely dangerous, it was transformative, and that transformation could challenge the Church's centuries-old grip on power. In response, the Vatican began to take action. It wasn't long before agents were sent to infiltrate the group of scholars. Men and women loyal to the Vatican, disguised as fellow researchers and intellectuals, slowly began to join the scholars' ranks. Their purpose was not to contribute to the quest for knowledge, but to keep it under control. They were there to watch, to gather information and to report back to the Vatican. These agents would use the scholars' trust to ensure that no part of the divine language was revealed to the outside world. Every piece of information that was uncovered, every tablet that was deciphered, would be kept hidden from the world at any cost. Among these agents was someone who had once been at the center of the search. Thomas's former mentor, Father Antonius's most devoted disciple, had risen through the ranks of the Vatican, and now held a high-ranking position within the Church. His name was Matteo, and in his youth he had been the one who had assisted Father Antonius in transcribing the ancient codex. But the years had changed him. The young man who once shared his mentor's thirst for knowledge had now become a key player in the Vatican's efforts to suppress it. Matteo had always been loyal to the Church, but the weight of his former mentor's discoveries weighed heavily on him. He knew the significance of what they had uncovered. He had been there when Antonius first revealed the existence of the divine language, and he had watched as the texts were destroyed. Yet now, as a high-ranking official, he was part of the very machine that sought to keep the secrets buried. The conflict within Matteo grew with every passing day. On one hand, he owed everything to the Church. It had given him power, respect, and security. But on the other hand, he remembered Father Antonius's passion, his belief that the divine language could unlock the deepest mysteries of the universe. Matteo had once shared that belief. He had once believed that the pursuit of knowledge, no matter the cost, was worth it. But now, as he worked from the shadows to sabotage the scholar's search, he began to question his own loyalty. Was he protecting the truth, or was he simply protecting the Vatican's control over it? Matteo's internal struggle intensified as he grew closer to the scholars. He saw in their eyes the same determination that had once burned within him. They were not just searching for ancient texts, they were seeking truth, and they believed that truth could change the world. But Matteo knew that the Vatican would not allow that. The divine language, if uncovered, could shift the balance of power, not just within the Church, but across the entire world. As he observed the group, Matteo found himself at a crossroads. His loyalty to the Church was being tested, and the moral dilemma that had once seemed so clear now felt blurred. Was he serving the greater good by keeping the knowledge hidden, or was he condemning the world to remain in the dark? The shadow of the Vatican loomed over the scholars, but within that shadow, Matteo found himself standing at the edge of a dangerous precipice. The choice he faced would determine not just his future, but the fate of the knowledge that had been buried for centuries. The search for the divine language had led the scholars across the world, but it was in the remote desert, far from the bustling cities and well-travelled roads, that they made their most significant discovery. The sun beat down relentlessly as they trudged through the barren landscape, each step taking them deeper into the heart of the unknown. Rumours had whispered of a hidden temple, a place where ancient priests had once guarded knowledge far older than any known civilization. Many believed it was just a myth, a tale told to keep treasure hunters at bay. But the scholars were determined. They had come this far, and the promise of uncovering the language of the divine was too great to ignore. When they finally stumbled upon the ruins, it was nothing like what they had expected. The temple was buried beneath layers of sand and time, its once grand structure now little more than crumbling stone and forgotten memory. But within its walls, the air felt different, thicker, charged with something ancient, as if the very stones had absorbed the knowledge they had once held. The scholars moved cautiously, each one aware of the weight of what they had found. The walls were lined with faded murals depicting strange figures and symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden meaning. But it was the manuscripts they uncovered within the temple's inner sanctum that would change everything. The manuscripts were far more extensive than anything the scholars had discovered before. Pages upon pages of ancient writings, filled with symbols and markings that seemed to vibrate with a kind of energy. These were not the broken tablets they had found in Babylon, nor were they the carefully transcribed texts they had worked on in secret. These were the original writings, the preserved knowledge of the ancient priests who had once spoken the divine language. But there was a problem. The script was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was written in a complex code, a pattern that intertwined the divine language with symbols that were entirely foreign. The scholars spent days poring over the manuscripts, trying to decipher the code, but it was unlike anything they had encountered. Each symbol seemed to hold multiple meanings, and the structure of the writing was far more intricate than any language they had studied. Some symbols were familiar, others completely alien. It was as if the language itself had evolved, morphing over centuries into something far more complex, something that could not be understood without unlocking the deeper layers of meaning hidden within it. Despite the difficulty, the scholars knew they were on the brink of something incredible. The manuscripts contained teachings that went beyond the divine language itself. They spoke of the creation of the world, the nature of the soul, and the relationship between humanity and the divine. The ancient priests had preserved these teachings in the hopes that one day someone would come along to unlock their secrets. But they had hidden them away in a code, perhaps to protect them from those who would misuse the knowledge, or from those who would seek to suppress it. As the scholars continued their work, they realized that the divine language was far more powerful than they had ever imagined. It was not just a tool for understanding the universe. It was a key to reshaping reality itself. The language held the potential to unlock forces far beyond human comprehension. But with this realization came a new sense of fear. What if the knowledge contained within these manuscripts was too powerful to be understood? What if unlocking the code would unleash something beyond their control? In the depths of the hidden temple, the scholars had uncovered not just the language of the divine, but a new understanding of the world itself. The sacred knowledge they had found was far more than they had bargained for. It was a gift and a curse, a secret that had been buried for centuries, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And that moment had finally come. The day they finally unlocked the divine language felt like the world had shifted beneath their feet. For years, the scholars had been struggling to make sense of the ancient manuscripts they had discovered in the hidden temple. The cryptic symbols and complex codes seemed impenetrable, but with every passing day, they grew closer to understanding. The breakthrough came when they began to cross-reference the strange symbols with the secret transcriptions Father Antonius had made before the codex was destroyed. Those careful notes, hidden away for years, became the key to deciphering the divine language. As they transcribed the ancient texts, the scholars felt as though they were unearthing the very fabric of creation itself. The language was far more than just a system of communication. It was a blueprint for existence. The divine language, once believed to be lost forever, began to reveal its secrets. The words weren't merely symbols. They were powerful forces that shaped the world, a language that governed the laws of the universe. Every translation felt like a revelation, as if the scholars were rediscovering the true nature of the world around them. The text spoke of the origins of humanity in a way that no one had ever imagined. According to the translations, humanity was not a mere accident of evolution or creation. We were part of a greater plan woven into the fabric of existence by a divine hand. The divine language had been the key to shaping human life, and it was through the understanding of this language that humanity had the power to understand the universe itself. The origins of life, the nature of consciousness, and even the question of free will were all addressed in the texts, and the answers they uncovered were unlike anything the scholars had ever expected. One of the most shocking revelations came as the scholars began to understand the role of divine intervention in human history. The texts suggested that key moments in human history had not been random or purely the result of human action. Divine forces had shaped the course of events, guiding humanity toward certain outcomes. The building of the Tower of Babel, the fall of civilizations, the rise of religions, each event had been influenced by the divine language, which had the power to shape destiny itself. The divine language, the texts revealed, was not just a means of communication. It was a tool of divine will, a way for the Creator to intervene in the affairs of mankind. The scholars were left in awe of what they had uncovered. These were not just ancient teachings or lost knowledge. They were the foundations of existence itself. The divine language held the power to alter reality, to control the flow of time, and to influence the very fabric of the universe. With each translation, the scholars felt as though they were gaining access to a deeper understanding of life, one that connected humanity to the divine in a way that no religion had ever fully explained. The implications were overwhelming. But as the truth of the divine language began to unfold, so did the danger. The knowledge they had uncovered was too powerful to remain hidden forever. The Vatican had already shown its willingness to go to great lengths to suppress such knowledge. The scholars knew that they had opened a door that could never be closed again. The divine language was not just a tool. It was a weapon, one that could change the course of human history. And now they had to decide what to do with it. As the scholars continued their work with the divine language, they began to unlock deeper layers of knowledge that shook their understanding of the world. The translations, once thought to be simple records of ancient wisdom, began to reveal a story that was far more complex and far more troubling than they had anticipated. The cosmology that the divine language described was radically different from the traditional biblical narrative that had been taught for centuries. It told a story of creation that went beyond the idea of a singular divine act, where humanity was formed in an isolated moment, separated from the rest of the universe. Instead, the divine language spoke of a much larger, interconnected cosmic plan, one where humanity was not a singular event, but an integral part of a greater cosmic tapestry. According to the texts, the world hadn't been created in a single act, as the Bible suggested. Instead, it was the result of a continuous process, a dynamic flow of creation that had been set in motion by the divine language itself. The texts described a universe where all things were interconnected, where the forces of creation were constantly in motion, shaping not just the physical world, but the very fabric of reality. The divine language was not just a tool of communication. It was the force that held the universe together. Every star, every planet, every living being was part of an intricate web, woven together by the very words that the divine used to speak creation into existence. Humanity, in this new cosmology, was not separate from the universe. We were part of a much larger plan, one that involved not just Earth, but the stars, the galaxies, and the very structure of the cosmos itself. The divine language revealed that we were meant to play a role in the unfolding of the universe, that our existence was intricately tied to the larger patterns of creation. The idea of a single creation event, a one-time act of divine will, was not just an oversimplification, it was a distortion of a much larger truth. Humanity was not the sole focus of creation. We were part of a grander, more intricate design that included all things in the cosmos. The implications of this revelation were staggering. It wasn't just that the divine language contradicted the biblical creation story, it challenged the very way humanity had understood its place in the world. For centuries, people had believed that humans were the center of creation, that God had created the world specifically for us. But the divine language painted a different picture, one where humanity was part of a much larger, ongoing process, a tiny piece of a much greater puzzle. It was a humbling realization that undermined centuries of religious teachings. For the scholars who had uncovered this truth, the question was no longer just about knowledge. It was about what to do with it. The story that the divine language revealed was not just a theological debate. It had the power to shift the very foundation of human belief. If this new understanding of creation were to spread, it could alter how people viewed God, the universe, and their place within it. But the scholars knew that the Vatican would never allow such a truth to be made public. The Church had always maintained its authority by teaching a singular, controlling narrative of creation. To reveal the divine language's story of a more interconnected universe would threaten that control. The truth of the divine language had been revealed, and with it came a choice. The scholars could either keep this knowledge hidden, continuing their search in secret, or they could risk everything and reveal the truth to the world. The divine language had spoken, and now the scholars had to decide whether they would obey its call. The pressure had been mounting for months, and the time had finally come. The Vatican, having learned of the scholars' progress in translating the divine language and the dangerous knowledge it contained, could no longer sit idly by. For centuries, the Church had maintained its authority by controlling the narrative of creation. And now that narrative was being challenged in ways it had never been before. The teachings of the divine language, with its complex cosmology, and the revelation that humanity was part of a larger, interconnected plan, threatened everything the Church had worked so hard to protect. The Vatican's hold on spiritual and intellectual power was at risk. In response to the growing threat, the Vatican issued an ultimatum to the scholars: cease their work immediately or face the consequences. The message was clear and unambiguous. The scholars, who had already risked so much in their search for the truth, were now being told that their quest for knowledge had reached a point where it could no longer continue without severe repercussions. The Church would not allow them to continue uncovering the secrets of the divine language. The cost of defying the Vatican would be high, and they would have to decide whether they were willing to pay that price. The Vatican's decree was swift and ruthless. The scholars were given no room for negotiation. The threat of excommunication loomed over them, a powerful tool in the Vatican's arsenal. To be excommunicated was to be cast out of the church, to be severed from the very community that had shaped their lives. It meant losing access to the sacraments, to the teachings, and to the very foundation of their faith. For some of the scholars, the threat of excommunication was enough to make them reconsider their work. The fear of being ostracized from the church, of being condemned to a life without the support of their community, was a terrifying prospect. But the ultimatum didn't stop there. For those who refused to obey the church's command, imprisonment awaited them. The Vatican had long used its power to imprison those who opposed its teachings, to silence dissenting voices and keep dangerous knowledge out of the public's reach. The scholars knew that the Vatican's network of informants and agents was vast, and that once they were marked as enemies of the Church, they would be hunted down, isolated, and silenced. Imprisonment meant not just physical confinement, it meant the destruction of their work, the erasure of everything they had uncovered, and the death of their quest for truth. And then there was the final threat, the most terrifying of all: death. The Church had never been afraid to resort to the ultimate measure when it came to maintaining control. Those who posed a real threat to the Vatican's power had been executed in the past, and the scholars knew that they were no different. To continue their research was to walk a razor's edge. They had already uncovered truths that could shatter the Church's authority, and the Vatican would stop at nothing to ensure that those truths were buried forever. Faced with these choices, the scholars found themselves at a crossroads. Should they continue their dangerous quest for truth, risking everything they had worked for? Or should they abandon their mission and protect themselves from the wrath of the Vatican? The knowledge they had uncovered was far too important to ignore, but the price of uncovering it could be more than they were willing to pay. The Vatican had issued its ultimatum, and now the scholars had to make the most difficult decision of their lives. Would they stand up for the truth, or would they bow to the Church's demands and walk away? The choice would shape their fate, and the future of humanity's understanding of creation forever. The news came like a storm, swift, unforgiving, and without mercy. The Vatican, having learned of their defiance, had ordered the immediate arrest of Father Antonius and his disciples. The scholars who had spent years uncovering the divine language, seeking truths that had been buried for centuries, were now branded as criminals, enemies of the Church. The Vatican's decree was clear. They were to be captured, their work destroyed, and their lives erased. It was a chilling moment, one that would change everything for Antonius and his followers. Faced with the threat of imminent capture, Antonius and his disciples had no choice but to flee. The safety of their lives was no longer guaranteed. The very Vatican that had once welcomed their research now saw them as a threat to its control over knowledge and power. The scholars scattered into the night, abandoning their studies, their homes, and the lives they had built. They were now fugitives, forced to live in the shadows, hunted by the very institution they had once served. The knowledge they had uncovered could not be allowed to fall into the hands of the Vatican, and so they were left with no choice but to go into hiding. But as the group fled, a rift began to form. The weight of the decision to defy the Church was more than some could bear. Antonius had always believed in the pursuit of truth, in the power of knowledge to illuminate the world. But not all of his disciples shared his vision. As they hid from the Church's agents, some of the scholars began to question whether the truth they had uncovered was worth the risk. The dangers they faced were real. the Vatican had already shown its willingness to silence anyone who posed a threat to its authority. To defy the Church was to walk a dangerous path, and some began to fear that the price of their knowledge would be too high. The group was split between those who wanted to continue the search for truth, no matter the cost, and those who, fearing for their lives, wanted to abandon the pursuit altogether. Those who wished to continue argued that they had already uncovered too much to turn back now. The divine language held the key to understanding creation itself, and they believed that revealing it to the world was their duty. To stop now, they argued, would be to abandon everything they had worked for, and the truth they had uncovered would be lost forever. On the other side were those who believed that the consequences of defying the Vatican were too great. They had seen the power the Church wielded, and they knew that to continue their work meant risking not only their lives, but the lives of everyone they loved. The fear of excommunication, imprisonment, or worse, death, was too much for them to ignore. They argued that knowledge was important, but not at the cost of their own safety. As the conflict between faith and knowledge grew, Antonius found himself torn. He had always believed that the truth was worth any sacrifice, but now he saw the cost in the eyes of his disciples. The pursuit of knowledge had brought them to the edge of a precipice, and the fall could be fatal. Some wanted to fight, to continue their work at any cost. Others, exhausted and fearful, just wanted to survive. The division was deep, and the once unified group of scholars was now fractured. With the Vatican's agents closing in, Antonius had to make a decision. Would he continue to lead the fight for truth, even if it meant the end of everything they had worked for? Or would he yield to the pressure and save those who could still be saved? The choice was not easy, and as the group split, the very heart of their mission hung in the balance. As the scholars scattered across Europe, hiding in remote villages and abandoned monasteries, their work continued in secret. Each scholar had their own small safe haven, away from the prying eyes of the Vatican's agents. The days were spent in quiet study, translating the ancient texts they had discovered, piecing together the fragments of the divine language that had been hidden for so long. Their mission remained the same, to unlock the full power of the language, to understand its true meaning, and to reveal it to the world. But as they worked, they were constantly aware of the danger that loomed over them. The Vatican, having already ordered their arrest, would stop at nothing to erase their work, and it wasn't just their lives at risk anymore. The Church, determined to protect its power and authority, began a systematic effort to rewrite history. Any reference to the divine language or the story of Babel was carefully removed from texts, and any scholar who had been associated with the search was branded a heretic. The Vatican knew that the knowledge the scholars were uncovering posed a direct threat to the established narrative of creation and the Church's place in history. The divine language, with its complex cosmology and its challenge to the traditional teachings of Christianity, could not be allowed to see the light of day. So, the Church began to erase any trace of it from historical records. Documents were altered, ancient manuscripts were destroyed, and new texts were created to replace the old ones. The history of Babel, once a cornerstone of religious teachings, was rewritten to fit the Church's narrative. The story of the Tower of Babel was no longer about the unity of mankind or the divine intervention that scattered humanity. It became a simple tale of punishment, a warning against pride and defiance. The divine language, which had once been central to the understanding of creation, was now a forgotten relic of a dangerous past. The Vatican's rewriting of history extended far beyond just the story of Babel. Every reference to the lost language was erased, every trace of its teachings obliterated. The Church worked tirelessly to ensure that the scholars' discoveries would remain hidden, buried beneath layers of propaganda and false history. It wasn't just about controlling knowledge. It was about controlling the very narrative of human existence. If the divine language was allowed to be understood, it would undermine everything the Church had built. The Vatican needed the world to believe that its teachings were the only path to salvation, and any other truth had to be silenced. But even as the Vatican worked to erase the past, the scholars continued their work in secret. They knew that the struggle they faced was not just for knowledge, it was for the future of humanity's understanding of the world and their place in it. The divine language held the key to a deeper understanding of creation, one that transcended the limitations of human understanding and connected humanity to the divine. The scholars understood that if they were to succeed in their mission, they had to remain hidden, to continue their work without drawing attention to themselves. The Vatican's efforts to rewrite history were vast, but the scholars were determined not to let the truth be buried forever. They knew the risks of continuing their work, but they also knew that the knowledge they held was too important to be forgotten. As the Vatican tried to erase the past, the scholars fought to keep the truth alive. They worked in the shadows, knowing that their efforts would one day shine a light on the divine language and reveal the truth about humanity's origins and the universe's true design. As the Vatican continued its campaign to erase the knowledge of the divine language, a new force quietly emerged from the shadows. A secret society was born, formed by scholars, artists, and mystics who shared a deep reverence for the ancient knowledge the Church sought to suppress. These individuals had come to realize that the knowledge of the divine language was not just something to be studied. It was a legacy that had been passed down through generations, a key to understanding the universe itself. They knew that the truth could not be allowed to die, not after all they had uncovered. The members of this secret society operated in complete secrecy, taking great care to avoid the prying eyes of the Vatican's agents. They moved in the dark corners of Europe's intellectual circles, meeting in hidden locations such as remote monasteries, abandoned cathedrals, and quiet libraries where the Church's reach did not extend. They knew that any visible act of rebellion against the Vatican could cost them their lives, so they worked in silence, ensuring that their discoveries would survive the Church's efforts to wipe them from history. The society had no formal name, but its members were united by a shared purpose: to preserve the knowledge of the divine language. To the outside world, they were simply scholars, artists, and mystics, each pursuing their own studies. But beneath the surface, they were part of something much larger. They were custodians of a truth that had been hidden for centuries, and they would stop at nothing to protect it. They passed down their discoveries not through open teachings or public lectures, but through cryptic symbols, hidden manuscripts, and secret codes that only the initiated could understand. One of the most important ways the society preserved the knowledge was through art. Artists, many of whom were sympathetic to their cause, created works that encoded pieces of the divine language in visual form. Paintings, sculptures, and even architectural designs became repositories of hidden knowledge, with symbols and patterns woven into the artwork that could only be understood by those who knew the secret. These works were scattered across Europe, often in plain sight, hidden in the corners of churches, palaces, and public spaces where they would not attract attention. But it was not just the visual arts that played a role in preserving the divine language. Mystics and philosophers within the society also contributed by developing esoteric systems of thought that incorporated the principles of the language. These systems weren't meant to be understood by the masses, but were carefully guarded and passed down only to those who were deemed worthy. The society was like a living, breathing organism, its members working in secret, each one contributing to the preservation of a truth that had the power to change everything. As the years passed, the society grew more sophisticated. It became a network of like-minded individuals who shared a commitment to the truth and to the protection of the divine language. They communicated through subtle signs, using hidden symbols to signal their allegiance to one another. Those who were initiated into the society were given access to a vast archive of knowledge, texts, scrolls, and manuscripts that detailed the mysteries of the divine language and its power to shape reality. The secret society became a quiet force in the world, its members operating under the radar of the Church, working to ensure that the divine language would one day be revealed to the world. The Vatican may have thought it had silenced the truth, but in the hidden corners of Europe, the knowledge lived on, protected by those who were willing to risk everything to preserve it. The Society's work was not just about safeguarding ancient knowledge. It was about ensuring that humanity would one day be able to unlock the secrets of the universe. As the scholars continued to piece together the fragments of the divine language and uncover the true history of Babel, they began to realize something even more unsettling. The Vatican, the powerful institution they had once revered, was not simply a religious authority. It was a carefully constructed empire built on manipulation and control. The Vatican's power was not just spiritual, it was political, intellectual, and historical. Behind the grand cathedrals and lofty proclamations of faith, the Church had established a network of censorship that reached deep into every aspect of society. The truth, it seemed, had been hidden for centuries. The Church's control over historical records was one of the most crucial elements in its strategy to maintain power. The Vatican had long been the keeper of history, deciding which events would be recorded and which would be erased. It wasn't just about preserving religious doctrine. It was about shaping the very narrative of human existence. The history of Babel, the story of the divine language, and countless other truths had been buried, rewritten, or ignored altogether. The Vatican had carefully crafted a version of history that served its interests, one in which it stood as the ultimate authority, the sole interpreter of truth. But the more the scholars uncovered, the more they realized how deeply entrenched the Vatican's manipulation of history really was. The calendar, for instance, had been altered to serve the Church's needs. The Gregorian calendar, which had been adopted in the late 16th century, was a tool for asserting the Church's dominance over time itself. The very measurement of years, days, and months had been reshaped to align with the Church's teachings, erasing ancient systems of reckoning that were once used by civilizations far older than Christianity. The timeline of history had been warped, manipulated to suit the narrative the Vatican wanted the world to believe. The Vatican's control over knowledge went even further. The Church had long been the gatekeeper of intellectual thought, deciding which ideas would be allowed to flourish and which would be silenced. Scholars, artists, and thinkers who dared to challenge the Church's version of truth were punished, their works censored or destroyed. The Inquisition, once a tool for enforcing religious conformity, had also served as a means of stamping out dangerous ideas. Any knowledge that threatened the Vatican's authority, whether it was scientific, philosophical, or historical, was suppressed. The true story of Babel and the knowledge of the divine language was just one of many truths that the Church had sought to bury. The more the scholars uncovered, the more they realized that the Vatican's power was not just spiritual. It was built on fear, ignorance, and control. The Church had used its authority to manipulate not only religious beliefs, but also the very way people understood the world. History had been rewritten, the truth buried, and humanity had been kept in the dark for centuries. The divine language, which had once connected humanity to the divine, was now lost, hidden away by those who feared its power. But the scholars knew they could not let this truth remain hidden any longer. The Vatican's mask had been torn away, revealing the web of control it had woven over centuries. The divine language, the true history of Babel, and the knowledge that had been suppressed were too important to be ignored. The time had come to expose the Vatican's manipulation of history and bring the truth to light. It was a dangerous path to walk, but the scholars knew that the world needed to know what had been hidden from them for so long. The mask had fallen, and now the real fight for truth was about to begin. After years of painstaking work, the scholars finally reached the moment they had been waiting for. The last piece of the divine language had been translated. For so long, they had pieced together fragments of ancient texts, unsure of the bigger picture, unsure of what the divine language truly held. But now, with the final translation complete, they found themselves standing at the edge of a revelation that would change everything. What had once seemed like a puzzle, its pieces scattered across centuries, was now clear. The truth was unfolding before them, and it was more than they could have ever imagined. As they read the last passage, a chilling sense of awe and wonder washed over them. The divine language had not only spoken of the origins of humanity and the structure of the universe, but it also contained a prophecy about the future of humanity. The prophecy was not just a prediction, it was a warning, one that echoed through time. It spoke of a coming shift in consciousness, a time when humanity would rediscover its connection to the divine language. This awakening would bring with it a profound change, one that would allow humanity to reclaim the knowledge that had been lost for so long. The scholars sat in silence as they processed the meaning of what they had uncovered. The prophecy was clear. Humanity was on the verge of a great transformation, one that would allow people to reconnect with the divine and unlock the secrets that had been hidden from them. The divine language, once lost, would once again become accessible to those who sought it. This shift in consciousness would not just change the individual, it would change the very fabric of human existence. The boundaries between the material and the spiritual would begin to blur, and humanity would once again be able to speak the language that had once bridged the gap between the divine and the earthly. But the prophecy also carried with it a warning. The shift in consciousness would not be easy. Those who had worked to suppress the knowledge of the divine language, particularly the Vatican, would not allow it to be reclaimed without a fight. The Vatican's hold over knowledge, its control over history, and its manipulation of truth had ensured that the divine language remained hidden for centuries. But as the prophecy foretold, the time was coming when this knowledge would be brought into the light. The Vatican would try to stop it, but it would be unable to hold back the awakening of humanity. The scholars knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for. The divine language was not just a tool for understanding the past, it was a key to the future. The prophecy was not just about the rediscovery of ancient knowledge, it was about the beginning of a new era. The coming shift in consciousness would allow humanity to transcend the limitations that had been placed on them, to break free from the chains of ignorance and fear, and to reclaim their rightful place in the universe. The divine language would serve as the bridge between humanity and the divine, a connection that had been severed long ago. But with this revelation came great responsibility. The scholars knew that the knowledge they had uncovered could change the world, but it could also bring great danger. The Vatican would stop at nothing to prevent the truth from being revealed, and those who sought to share the knowledge would face unimaginable consequences. Yet, the scholars also knew that they could not turn back. The prophecy had spoken, and it was now up to them to ensure that humanity would awaken to the truth. The final revelation had been made, and the journey to reclaim the divine language was about to begin. As the prophecy was revealed, a sense of urgency began to pulse through the air. The scholars knew that the knowledge they had uncovered could not remain hidden for long. The divine language, once thought lost, had now resurfaced, and with it came the promise of a future where humanity could reconnect with its true origins. But the Vatican, aware of the threat this knowledge posed to its centuries-old control, wasted no time in escalating its efforts to suppress the divine language. The Church was now determined to crush any hope of awakening before it could take root. The Vatican's campaign was relentless. Secret agents were sent across Europe to track down and silence anyone associated with the divine language. Scholars were arrested, manuscripts were burned, and entire libraries were ransacked. The Vatican used its power to silence dissenting voices, employing both fear and force to ensure that the knowledge of the divine language would not spread. Its grip over history, the calendar, and knowledge itself was tightening, and it seemed that there was no limit to what the Church would do to protect its monopoly on truth. But there were those who refused to let the Church dictate the future. The secret society, formed in the shadows to protect and preserve the divine knowledge, became more active than ever. It had grown in strength, its members united by a shared commitment to the truth and the belief that the world had the right to know what had been hidden for so long. The Society's members, once operating alone and in secret, now began to coordinate their efforts, passing the knowledge of the divine language between them and working tirelessly to safeguard it. The scholars who had once been fugitives now found themselves at the center of a growing movement. The battle between the Church's control over knowledge and the secret society's determination to reveal the truth was intensifying. The Vatican's agents grew more desperate in their attempts to track down the remaining pieces of the divine language, while the secret society worked in the shadows, carefully distributing hidden manuscripts and teaching the language to a select few. The conflict was no longer just about knowledge, it was about the future of humanity itself. Tensions reached a boiling point as both sides prepared for the inevitable showdown. The Vatican, in its desperation, sought to silence any hope of rebellion by increasing its hold on society. The Church strengthened its control over education, further embedding its narrative into the very fabric of everyday life. It infiltrated every aspect of intellectual life, ensuring that anyone who questioned its teachings would face punishment. On the other hand, the secret society had begun to reach more and more people. The knowledge of the divine language was spreading, and it was becoming clear that the awakening foretold by the prophecy could no longer be stopped. The society's members knew that they were fighting not just for their own survival, but for the survival of the truth itself. They understood the risks, but the weight of the knowledge they carried was too great to ignore. The final confrontation between the forces of control and the forces of truth loomed closer with each passing day. The Vatican's power was built on centuries of secrecy and manipulation, but the secret society was determined to expose it. The battle for the future of humanity was about to reach its climax. The question remained, who would ultimately control the knowledge that would shape the world to come? A quiet revolution had begun, but this time it wasn't one that could be easily contained. The rediscovery of the divine language, once thought lost forever, had sparked something far greater than the scholars had ever anticipated. As the teachings spread, they began to resonate with people from all walks of life. The knowledge of the divine language revealed a connection to the universe that had been hidden for centuries, and soon it became clear that humanity was on the verge of a profound transformation. This was not simply the pursuit of knowledge, it was the awakening of something much deeper, something that connected everyone to the divine in a way they had never understood before. The world began to change as people woke up to the true nature of their existence. No longer did they see themselves as isolated beings, cut off from the divine or from each other. The divine language had revealed the interconnectedness of all things, the idea that humanity was part of a larger, cosmic plan. People began to understand that they were not separate from the universe, but integral to its unfolding. This knowledge gave them a new sense of purpose, a sense of unity with the world around them. It was as though the veil that had once separated them from the divine had been lifted, and for the first time in centuries they could see clearly. This awakening sparked a global movement. Across cities, villages, and towns, people began to gather, share the knowledge they had uncovered, and work together to rebuild the connection that had been lost. They understood that the truth of the divine language was not just a gift for a select few, but something that belonged to all of humanity. The movement was not just intellectual, it was spiritual. People began to reclaim their divine connection, and with it, the power to shape their own destinies. This was the beginning of a new era, one where humanity would rediscover its true potential. But the Vatican, though powerful, could not stop the tide of change. For centuries, the Church had held an iron grip over knowledge, shaping the way people saw the world and their place in it. It had used fear, manipulation, and control to maintain its position as the ultimate authority. Now, that authority was being challenged. The knowledge of the divine language, once suppressed and hidden away, was spreading rapidly, and the Vatican could no longer silence those who dared to speak the truth. The Church, desperate to maintain its control, tried to counter the movement. It condemned the teachings of the divine language as heretical, branding anyone who spread the knowledge as enemies of the faith. the Vatican used its vast network of influence to try to discredit the revolution. But it was no longer enough. The tide of change had already risen too high. The people had begun to see through the Vatican's mask, recognizing the lies that had been woven into the fabric of their history. This new movement, this awakening, was nothing less than the rebirth of humanity. It was as if the world was building its own Tower of Babel again. But this time, it wasn't about division, it was about unity. People from all corners of the globe were coming together, speaking a new language of understanding, cooperation, and shared knowledge. The divine language had been the key to unlocking their true potential. And nothing, not even the Church's immense power, could stop them now. The revolution had begun, and the future was no longer in the hands of the few. It belonged to all. The new Babel was being built, but this time it was a tower of unity, not division. The light that had been hidden for centuries had finally returned, and with it, humanity began to rebuild. The knowledge of the divine language, once suppressed and buried, now spread like wildfire across the globe. The world, once divided by fear, ignorance, and control, began to unite in a shared understanding of its true nature. People from all walks of life, scholars, artists, philosophers, and everyday individuals, came together to reclaim the knowledge that had been lost. It was no longer a secret whispered in the shadows, but a truth that belonged to everyone. The divine language had unlocked the door to a new era, one that would reshape the very foundation of human existence. As humanity embraced the divine language, the world began to change in ways that no one had thought possible. People who had once felt disconnected from the universe now understood their place within it. The knowledge they had uncovered showed them that they were not isolated beings, but part of a larger, interconnected web of existence. This understanding brought with it a sense of unity, a unity that transcended borders, cultures, and religions. People began to work together, sharing ideas and collaborating in ways that had never been seen before. The walls that had separated humanity for centuries were crumbling, and a new world was being built on the foundation of knowledge, cooperation, and mutual respect. The Tower of Babel, once a symbol of human arrogance and division, had been reborn in a new form. It was no longer a monument to pride, but a symbol of human potential and unity. The very thing that had once caused humanity's scattering was now the cornerstone of its rebirth. The new Tower of Babel was not a physical structure, but an idea, a vision of what humanity could become when it embraced its true nature and worked together. The divine language had shown them the way, and now they were building something greater than any empire, any kingdom, or any ideology could have ever achieved. The Vatican, though still powerful, found itself on the losing side of history. Its hold over knowledge, once absolute, was beginning to slip away. The Church's efforts to suppress the truth had failed. The people had seen through its manipulation and control. The Vatican could no longer dictate what the world would believe. The power that had been held in the hands of a few was now in the hands of the many. The truth of the divine language, once hidden and locked away, was now free to flourish. The Church's grip on humanity's understanding of creation and existence was weakening, and a new era of enlightenment was taking shape. As the light of knowledge spread, so did the understanding of humanity's true potential. People began to realize that their connection to the divine was not something to be feared or controlled. It was something to be celebrated. The divine language was the key to unlocking this potential, allowing humanity to tap into the vast well of wisdom, creativity, and understanding that had always been within them. The world was no longer a place of division and darkness. It was a place of possibility and light. The return of the light marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history. The truth that had been hidden for so long had finally been revealed, and with it came the opportunity to build a better world. The Tower of Babel, once a symbol of human pride, had been transformed into a symbol of human unity. The world, now illuminated by the knowledge of the divine language, was on the path to a new era, one where truth, knowledge, and collaboration would guide humanity toward its true potential. The light had returned, and the world would never be the same again.